So here's the great compromise. By the way, it takes them a while. They just cannot get to this thing. Great compromise is we'll split Congress into two bodies. The first one will be called the House of Representatives. I have a few questions on the test here that's not ID related, but I want you to understand the function of our government and how this works. Helps you understand the states too. This is the House of Representatives. I'd like you to know it's called the People's House. The average American's place where their interests are heard and their interests are advanced. It's proportional representation. So Virginia's going to have a lot more representatives in the House of Representatives than Rhode Island will. They're directly elected by the people. I want you to know that too. They form districts in each of these states, and the people directly elect their own representative. And that representative only gets to be their representative for 2 years. What happens if that person goes to Washington and they don't advance the interests of the majority of the people of their district? He's out of there, right? That's awesome. So that if the people are mad about some development, they can very quickly change. This is a wonderfully responsive government. It's a great idea, the way we came up with it. So if Daniel Shea and company are all upset in Massachusetts over some economic policy, they're going to be sending their representatives here, right? And they will feel like their voice is being heard. Now, the other powerhouse, this is the real propertied part of America. You might say this is the have-nots, have an equal voice here. This tends to be the capital class, a propertied class. There's 2 per state. That's the big compromise here. In this body, every state will have equal representation. So Rhode Island has 2 senators and Virginia has 2 senators. They have 6-year terms. They're only elected every 6 years. And I didn't put this up here, but they are not directly elected by the people of their state. They are elected or appointed by the state legislature. So the Virginia legislature, the state government, would decide who the senators are going to be for their state. So that lets the states really advance their interests there. It's also going to tend to be the propertied people of the state. Now the Senate has a special role to play in balancing power with the executive. And I'll come back to that in a minute when I talk about appointments and treaties. So that's the biggest compromise and the great compromise, is to split this thing. The other part of it has to do with allowing states that have slavery, how will they count their population? And what's that agreement called? The 3/5? Yeah, I was thinking about 2/3 or 3/5. Which one is it? This is a 3/5 compromise. Slaveholding states are allowed to count 60% of their enslaved population when we're figuring out proportional representation in the House of Representatives. That's the great compromise. Once they get that nailed down, it begins to move forward. And they get the whole Constitution written up. And it lays out the executive branch. We'll have a president that is elected by the people of the states. But it's this weird thing. I think I have this thing called the Electoral College on there. Why don't you go ahead and put the Electoral College? It's an interesting thing. We don't know how many presidents a state will put forward. Like, we didn't know then that we had the party system develop. And there would just be 2 big challengers. And so what they decided to do is create an Electoral College. So here's how the voting... In the Constitution it says on the first Tuesday of November, every 4 years there will be an election for president. And on that day, the states are really electing representatives to the Electoral College. It's a funny thing. But here's how this thing works. First Tuesday of November, Virginia is going to decide what are the delegates we're going to send to the Electoral College to cast our votes for who we want for president. Same thing happens in all the states. Then they meet in December. But the thing is, they might have been 4 or 5 or 6 different candidates. So when you get to the Electoral College, Virginia might have come in saying, we all want James Madison. But when they get there, they realize that none of the other states really want James Madison. And everybody's kind of coalescing towards this other person. And so they begin to cut deals. And that's the Electoral College. It's the indirect election kind of the president. But it's to work out a compromise. If the Electoral College cannot figure out its way, it then goes to the House of Representatives. And they can vote for who the president's going to be. I'd like y'all to know these little features, because every once in a while it comes up. In 2000 we had it's called a constitutional crisis, when we don't have a clear outcome in an election. Do you remember that? Y'all don't remember that, do you? 2000. with George Bush versus Al Gore, right? All right. Next thing I want you to know. The president has a 4-year term, and then they have to stand for re-election. And that's this idea of creating a republic. They're trying to limit the amount of time. We're creating offices, really. And that's the whole great thing the Romans did back a long time ago, right? Creating this idea of an office which has got certain authority and power. There'll be a vice president who will be prepared to take over and also kind of be like a co-consul. Now the president, there's going to be a national government. And the different things that we have will be a Secretary of State who handles our foreign policy of the government. We'll have the Secretary of Treasury, which will handle the finances of the country, and as it gets in taxes and it spends money on programs. War is an important thing for us, so we need to have a military civilian over all the officer class and such. And then we need somebody to prosecute the laws. If a law that's been written by Congress, if we have somebody cooking meth in their backyard, right? Well, we have state laws for that. But if it's a federal law, then the Attorney General will be able to apprehend these people and bring them before that third branch, the judge. Now, is the president going to go get these people? These are delegated positions of executive leadership. So this is called the cabinet. I'd like you guys to know that in case you don't yet. The president's cabinet. Now today we have about 16 cabinet members because we've grown the government into all kinds of areas, right? Now, how does this work? Can the president just appoint anyone he wants? He can appoint the president can appoint anyone they want, but there's a process that the Senate has got to do. The president decides the names of the people they want to put in these positions, but they submit those names not to the House of Representatives, but to the Senate. And the Senate has to confirm these appointments. And once confirmed, then they're in power. So the reason we do that is to make sure that the president doesn't we don't get some anti-democratic people in there. We need to have what do we call this? Do y'all know what we call this as an idea, a theory? This different branches who are sharing power and making sure that no one takes too much power. Thank you. It's called checks and balances, right? This is balancing and checking to make sure that the president that's been elected isn't an anti-democratic person who's going to aim for some kind of kingship. Also, whenever our Secretary of State negotiates with another country and we get a treaty and the president is carrying out the foreign policy, those treaties have got to be submitted to the Senate. That's another thing that comes up on your test in here. Y'all need to know that the Senate also has to approve any binding foreign policy because it's the foreign policy before all the states. So the states should have a chance to agree on this thing. A couple more things I want you to know. How about the process of getting a piece of legislation written and enacted? How does that work? Do y'all know how we get a bill written and authorized? That's going to show up on your test too. Because I'm making sure that as you leave the class and go forward for the next however many years you're going to be alive in the American Republic, you'll know how this works. Anybody want to share how it works? Anybody want to try it? Does the president say, here's my law? Okay, where does it initiate? Thank you. What you got? Deidre? Where do you think it starts? I don't know. Maybe over here? These are the law writers. House Representatives. Now, either one can initiate a bill. But what has to happen? Both chambers have to agree on the bill. There'll be a bill in the Senate. There'll be a bill in the Congress. Sometimes they're a little different. Maybe the Senate's got something going on, so they eventually have to have a conference. And then they make amendments, and they finally come up with a bill that will pass both of those. And that's how a bill gets established, and that's when it goes to, is that it? Is it over? It's got to be signed, right? Who's got to sign it? The president has to sign it. It goes to the president's office for his signature. And there's only so many days. I can't remember. I should find out. Get the Constitution and find out. He's only got so far he got only so many days to sign it. What happens if the president doesn't sign that bill? That's what? That's a veto. That's actually called a pocket veto. That means they didn't want to make a big to-do of it, but they didn't sign it. But it requires the president's signature. Now, is that it? Is it over?
It goes back to Congress.
it can go back to Congress. Congress, if they're upset enough, and the president hasn't convinced them that it was a bad bill, how do they get it? And this is called overriding a veto, right? So the president's veto can be overridden, and how does it work? Do you remember this is that number you used a while ago? 2/3, right. 2/3 of both houses have got to say, no, we really want this bill. And then it becomes a law without the president's signature. All right. But he's still expected to uphold and enforce these laws. So far, all right. Couple things I want you to know about the House of Representatives now. All monetary bills, all budgets have got to originate in the people's house. Because that's what we care most about, don't we? Paying taxes. Because we believe that governments are there to protect our property and our liberty and our security. And we want to make sure that they're not taking too much of our property, only the right amount. So all budget bills have to initiate in the House of Representatives. Also, the second one I want you to know, all declarations of war have got to initiate in the House of Representatives. Because are these the guys who got to be on the front line fighters, the property class? Nope, it's going to be these guys, the farmers and the artisans. They're the ones who are going to be out there on the front of the battlefields. So the people when the president has to ask the American people for a declaration of war. It's different in the 20th century, 21st century. But the House of Representatives has got to agree to this war message. And they've got to, that's when they give the authority to the president to pick up another part of, they're called commander-in-chief of the armies. I need y'all to know that we kind of have a dual role a dual mantle, right? The president is usually the chief administrator of the government who oversees the different functioning of the government. But if we get into a situation where we have a crisis which requires military movements, then the president puts on the mantle of commander-in-chief. And then he, the civilian, is over the armies. And that's something that also is very important to democracy. So that the military is under civilian control. I can't even tell you how important that is. Many countries in the world today, the military in the background runs the show. Because they've got the authority when it comes down to it, and they use that authority for themselves. So civilian control of the government is absolutely essential to democracy and Republican form of government. The last thing here is the Judicial Branch. We've got to also separate them from the other two branches. These guys made a law saying you can't sell homebrew. The Attorney General's got a district attorney in Tennessee who finds out that homebrew is being sold, right? And so the marshals system would apprehend this person who's broken this federal law. Now, do they get to decide whether or not that person's guilty? They do not. They have got to go to a court because it's a federal law, a federal court. And they're going to set up district courts around America. And they're going to set up a Supreme Court which will hear cases between the states and any constitutional questions. Now, how do we get these Supreme Court justices? Do we vote for them like we did over here by the states where the district is? No. We have the president appoint a judge for Massachusetts, for the federal bench. We call it the federal bench in Massachusetts. The president appoints them, but we've got to again have a check by the Senate, and so the Senate has to approve them. That's going to give the senators a lot of power. Because, in fact, what's going to happen is the senators are going to tell the president who they want, really, as a judge for their area. And so there's a kind of a give and take back and forth between presidents and senators. Now, I'd like you to know that their term is for their lifetime. They're supposed to be immune from the political winds that blow. They're supposed to be making the best decisions based on what is called jurisprudence, or the wisdom of the laws. And this is what we get in Philadelphia in 1787, this structure. Yes, this is all the Philadelphia Conference. In the back of your book is the U.S. Constitution. It's got all these articles and sections. It says if you're going to be president, what are the qualifications? How old do you have to be? What are some things that are provisions about that? Same thing for the Senate. It's all laid out in the Constitution. September rolls around. They call back the press. George Washington says, I'm very happy to announce that we finally have a new agreement for the American states, for a national government. The Articles of Confederation are out. And this is the United States Constitution.